welcome to the Olivier Assayas masterclass. Very innocent, young filmmaker.
I'm Giorgio Gossetti. I'm supposed to be a veteran film programmer. That's not correct.
And we are here to pick Olivier Assayas' brain for as long as he can endure.
Well, it's not his style, but you can clap.
Yeah.
You're allowed to.
Do you want to ask the first question?
Well, let's establish the rule of the day. The rule of the day is that he's the masterclass leader, you are the audience, we're here just like a sort of friendly company. So the less number of questions we can use, it will be absolutely better for the final result of this meeting. So please be free to hand your hand and to have questions, to have statements, to discuss with Olivier Assayas. It's a real pleasure, and I think you must be proud to be part of it, because he's not only a very good director, in my opinion, is a very cute person observing and trying to understand our time, our society, our way to look at the persons and the achievements of our reality. Yesterday I tried to define him also like a dystopic master, which is a terrible question because no one knows exactly what is dystopia. I even tried to look at the vocabulary, and dystopia can be different things, but somewhere is the way in which you can see the word with a little distance from what you really see and what you can imagine it could be or it is. Somewhere it's a Orwellian tradition. Orwell looked at the word like a place absolutely familiar, but once you observe it, it's just a little bit different every time from what you think to understand or think to see exactly. So does it idea fulfill with your way to approach certain number of subjects, not all the subjects of your work?
Yes, I mean, in a certain sense it does. In a certain sense it does, I mean, but if you use the word dystopian...
Wait a minute. Normally, when you have this kind of questions, the director thinks, what a stupid question, but I have to say yes in a certain way. You're right, because it's polite.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's no, because dystopian involves a certain level of moral judgment, meaning like revealing what is wrong with society. I've always tried not to be on that kind of level of judgment, but I certainly do believe that there is a world of appearances, and art somehow helps us reveal it as appearances and show something behind it that is not exactly reality, but possibly a bit closer to it. So I think that a lot of my movies, and I think you're in that sense, your observation is absolutely correct, has to do with exploring the different layers of reality. I suppose that in some of my earlier films, there was a certain level of moral judgment about it, in the sense that I was expressing something that is certainly, yes, in the Orwell tradition, doubtful, critical of how the world was changing. Now, it's not that I've come to terms with it, but I certainly think that a lot of what is going on is certainly beyond our will, and it's and certainly also beyond the will of most of the people involved in making it function. I think it works on its own, so it's not so much about morals, but about just trying to show things as they are and possibly let the audience, the viewer of my film or again any other artwork, have his own opinion. But but I think art is really trying to explore reality, not just it's about asking questions, about questioning reality.
Would you?
And it's not about the answers. I mean, at least my films are not about the answers. My films are always about the questions.
So would you think that through the writing process and then the making of the movie, you managed to clarify your own question for yourself and possibly for the viewer?
I think the film happens. The screenplay is just the framework. I mean, it's the place I start from, and hopefully, on my way, I will understand a little bit more about what exactly that film is and how somehow it can lead to issues that are bigger than whatever I imagined initially. I think the filmmaking is about the process, and the process has to be creative. That's why we were discussing how difficult it is to judge movies based on screenplays. A screenplay is just a moment of the creative process. You imagine a film, you try to think, maybe there's a path here for something that has not been done, or at least not been done that way, and step by step, it grows and becomes a film project. And then at some point you have to freeze it, because that's how movies get financed, that's how you get your actors, that's how you get the logistics moving. So you have to write a screenplay, which kind of freezes the process, but it also in certain way expands it, because all of a sudden, before you didn't have clearly outlined characters, you didn't have you only had a very vague storyline. Here it kind of forces you to have a clear storyline, to have clear characters and a starting point and end point. More in a more simple language, the screenplay forces you to have a backbone to your story. But then the creative process obviously doesn't stop there. It's just a phase. And once you're done with the screenplay, you can move on, and you can expand your film by giving life to your characters, by choosing actors, by finding location, and the film is expanding. And all of a sudden, it's a process where you have to leave the door open to what comes to you through your actors, through your location scouting, through your discussions with your collaborators. And again, when I agree with you that in the sense that the film ends up somewhere more complex and more and richer, hopefully, than where you started from. It's because you have left the door open, and a lot of things have invited themselves into your film. In personal terms, I feel extremely privileged to be making films, because it's also a way of discovering things about yourself and about the world. I think any movie I've made has been a path of discovery, of understanding dimension in the world I was not acquainted with, I was not familiar with. That's also one of the reasons I like shooting abroad and making films in foreign languages and outside, the framework of what French independent filmmaking should be.
Well, I think that we have the unique privilege to try to enter the process of the filmmaker conceiving and developing his project. So there is another question. You say in the moment you have your script in your hands, you freeze a certain reality of your process. and then it starts again. So can you measure the distance between the first draft and the final one? There are directors like Hitchcock who prepared everything before starting, and directors like Fellini who finished more or less the process just in the cutting room and even later.
To me, it's the creative process is constant. It stops with when it only stops when I'm like fine-tuning the final print, and I think you add to the film and to the narration, to the dramaturgy of the film until the very end. I mean, because as much as when you are writing, you feel that something that has to do with the reality, the core of the film is there, when you're kind of inventing the words the actors are going to say. But then when you cast, that's where obviously the film is happening. I mean, that's where the flesh and blood of the film materializes in front of you. But you can also say the same of when you are shooting the film, when all of a sudden it has space, it has air, it has perspective, it has musicality, rhythm, and you can say the same thing about the editing, because when you get to the editing room, you have this mountain of material, and you have to make sense of it and re-question it and make choices, and sometimes tough choices when you have different versions of the same scenes with nuances in terms of the psychology, the dynamics of the characters. You know, this is editing is like writing with real life. You know, it's some kind of hyper writing, so. I personally don't understand the film I have been making until the last minute, when finally everything is in place and the pace is there, the musicality is. I have chosen the moments where I use score or I don't use score. I've chosen where I do sharp editing or much looser editing. You know, and all of a sudden it's becoming a movie. And that's where finally I have a full understanding of what I have been doing. I've been, you know, because you compare the processes of very different filmmakers. You know, like Alfred Hitchcock, who is a genius, is one of the great masters of filmmaking. I mean, in the sense that he's pretty much into the core of what is most fascinating about the medium. But you also have filmmakers, but he's very controlled. He's incredibly controlled, but a little bit less so in the last films. But that's it. But he has this kind of very graphic, pure way of approaching cinema. In terms, as much as a film viewer, I relate very deeply and strongly to Hitchcock. As a filmmaker, I feel closer to filmmakers who would be doing like abstract canvases, where you paint something and then you try something else on top of it, and then you think, oh, okay, this thing works. Why not try this? And you know, I keep like I'm adding colors and I'm adding lines and I'm adding brush strokes until I finally feel like, oh, okay, this is it. This is what I was looking for. And of course, I relate to that process because that's how I approached art initially. As a teenager, I started painting. You know, it was very naive and it was like a kid's form of art. But still, I started by doing abstract canvases, and I suppose that something crystallized of my relationship to art through this process of abstract painting.
So, as you said, as almost abstract filmmaker in your approach and doing like very idiosyncratic movies that could only be yours, how do you convince like the different collaborators or the financial elements that the project is in good hands. I'm sure it was harder when you started and easier now, but how is that like battle every time?
It's a battle. It's a battle because it depends on the context, it depends on who you are dependent on. But the thing is that I've always been interested in making the kind of movies the other guys don't do, because otherwise, you know, what's the point of doing stuff that's being done? And the financing system is all about redoing the movie that was successful last year. You know, those guys are obsessed with, you know, with the box office, and they read the box office. Okay, so this movie was hugely successful last year. So it becomes the standard. You have to make something that in a way or another echoes. I mean, I'm kind of simplifying it, but not that much. Not that much. To do something, I mean, and I'm the opposite. I mean, you know, I'm the guy who's doing totally the contrary of what was successful last year or the year before or whatever. You know, I'm just, my proposition is not that appealing in the sense that I'm trying to explore areas that have not that somehow, you know, I don't want to idealize what I am doing. I'm not, you know, I'm not an experimental filmmaker at all, but yes, in a certain way I am, in a sense that I like to try things. I like to see if this thing that has not exactly been done that way will work or not. If a film does not have that dimension, I get instantly very bored. And I think that movies are an art form as long as they experiment. I think that if you keep on repeating what your forefathers have done, you know, it's really dull, irrelevant, and out of touch with the modern world. To me, the issue is to use my art to represent what I see in the world as it is changing in front of me. And I think the world is changing day after day, month after month, and year after year. And I genuinely don't think that you can make that you can make. You can make the repeat formulas that are even 1 or 2 years or 3 years old. I think that the most basic things, meaning the sentiments like love, grief, they change. They stay the same, but they also change, and the way you represent them changes. So it's all about trying to be attuned to the world as it is moving.
There is a perfect example of that, which is Clean. In a way, Clean is a perfect story, very traditional somewhere, but the attitude and the characters are really changing during the film and are really a little bit different from what you expect from any one of them, especially the main character.
Well, yes, because Clean is an extreme. It's like the most classic, traditional, basic storyline, meaning, you know, a mother tries to reconnect with the child she has lost touch with. You know, she is not initially not interested in maternity in a certain way, and gradually she realizes that she's a mother and there is a bond with the kid, and she has to somehow reconstruct it, reinvent it. It's a story you can tell at any age of humanity. You can it can be a period piece, it can be science fiction, whatever. But ultimately, it will be very basic feelings everybody will understand. But I am telling that story within the framework of indie rock. So all of a sudden, you know, I'm in touch with something that's going on around me, and it gives not just a twist, it gives a different meaning to those emotions, and they echo in ways that are more familiar to us because they are happening in a world that is our present.
Well, let's go inside. As the story was so basic, so typical, what moved you in, really? I mean, there was not only the challenge to do it differently.
No,
of course not.
No. When I made
was
a
something more.
a movie like Clean, it was pretty much about. It's about my
Like an
relationship.
example.
It's my relationship with Maggie Chung. You know, I made 2 movies with Maggie. I made Irma Vep in 1995. I mean, late 1990. No, actually, early 1996. That's when we shot. And I hardly knew her at the time. And through making that film and traveling the film, we got closer, and we ended up a couple. We ended up married. And somehow getting to know Maggie in a different way left me a bit, frustrated with the process of Irma Vep, because when I made Irma Vep, I was using Maggie as the icon she is. She is Maggie Chung, the Hong Kong superstar. And, but I did not give her a certain complexity of human feelings. The humanity in the film, in the film was the other character. It was the character of Zoe that was played by, by the French actress Nathalie Richard, and once I grew to understand who Maggie is, the kind of person she is, what's her real nature or identity, I realized that we could have pushed things much further, and I really thought, one day I should give Maggie a kind of part that where she would be able to express more of the person she is, and it had to do with the ambiguity of the person she is, meaning she is Chinese, but she was born in Hong Kong, but her parents instantly moved to London, and she grew up in London. She's pretty much a British girl, and when she was 17, 18, she flew back to Hong Kong because she was a contender in some beauty pageant, and she won first runner-up or something. She did not win, but she got first runner-up, and so that meant that instantly she got a movie. She got a contract with Shaw Brothers, the big production company there, and she started making making Hong Kong movies, and she became really famous because she was in movies playing the girlfriend of Jackie Chan, but none of that corresponded to who she is, because she was playing in Cantonese, which was almost like a second language, and the local Hong Kong culture was not her world. Her world was she grew like a middle class British girl, and when I offered her to play, and then she grew to become like a huge star, and she was and I think something essential was her work with Wong Kar-wai, when all of a sudden her acting expanded and the potential of what she could do expanded. Also, she did a great movie with Stanley Kwan, a couple of great movies with Stanley Kwan. But I realized that when I offered her Irma Vep, I was the first director to offer her to play in English, which is her first language. And all of a sudden, it opened up to her the possibility of acting in English. she at that point she kind of had the embryo of an international career, except she was always offered a Chinese part. You know, she was always like the Chinese girl in the film, and I think that as much as Maggie is Chinese, that's not the totality of her identity. You know, like we are not defined by our nor by our ancestry, nor by our gender or whatever. At least I don't think that. I think we are all unique individuals, and Maggie is a unique individual who has this kind of East meet West culture, so I really wanted to write a part for Maggie that could have been played by any actress, where she was not defined by the fact that she was Asian. It was just a generic, universal part dealing with universal emotions, and I was convinced that it would give her the possibility to expand her acting and her range, and she could give a performance that could be important in her career. The frustrating part of it is that she gave one of her great. I genuinely think she gave one of her major performances. It was recognized in the sense that she had Best Actress in Cannes, which is quite an achievement for a Chinese actress. And then she decided that she didn't want to act anymore. So that was kind of, you know, that was so. Instead of being like a new start for her acting, it was more like a swan song.
Speaking of Maggie Cheung, in Irma Vep, even if she's playing an icon, and she felt very warm.
Oh yeah.
Such as like the entire rest of the cast, you know, the acting was very loose, very naturalistic, and you just like were right in there with the people. I felt like true to life, even if by the end of the film it just goes into jazz and stuff. But then there's a movie that came a few years later called Demonlover, where every single character seems to be a total psychopath that's completely disconnected with their own humanity, or that was the feeling I had when I watched it. And when you are so good at getting just good acting out of people, or like naturalistic acting out of people, and you take the risk of doing a film where nobody is acting like a person. Can you just elaborate on that? That was a bit...
You're talking about two extremely different films. I suppose that Demonlover is as close to a political film I've ever made, in a sense that it's a movie that deals with alienation. I mean, you know, it's, how should I put it? It was the year 2000. I had just made two movies that were so much about psychology, about human relationships. One was, Irma Vep is something else, but you know, I had made late August, early September, and then Les Destinées sentimentales, sentimental destinies. They were all about humanity, characters, the evolution of their. It was about relationships, you know, and being as human and real as possible. And I felt, you know, I had gone as far as I could on that path, and it was the beginning of another millennium, and I wondered, you know, why not completely try something I've never done? Why not at the beginning of the third millennium? Why not just break with try something that would break with everything I had done before, start from scratch and do things that movies have never really done, or at least do not do. And I think I was very influenced at that time by the writing of Don DeLillo, and where I thought he would represent the alienation of the modern world, and he was both connecting with areas of the modern world that no other novelist was touching, and he was connecting things that were not supposed to connect. And of course, it was the beginning of the expansion of the internet. And I genuinely thought it was transforming the world as I knew it. And I saw it as a progress of alienation, as a moment when people, there was something about the evolution of modern societies, the brutality of the postmodern capitalism, of like what people call financial capitalism or whatever. And so I wanted to represent characters who were the opposite of what I had represented in my previous film, meaning where instead of where I had been looking for truth in my characters, I wanted to make a movie that had to do with the alienated modern language, where no one told the truth, where the dialogue was the kind of corporate lingo that that most people use in their work life, and where the only reality would be the body language, where the physicality of the actors would be more important than the language, because the language would only be lies, so it was. It was the first time I approached a film, just the casting of a film totally based on the physicality of the actors. My first idea was to use sportsmen and women, athletes. And then I started casting athletes, and I realized no, this is wrong. This is not the right, because there was very little potential for acting there, even the way I even in the broadest sense. So then I thought, maybe I should do it with TV. There was no reality shows yet. That came later. But I wanted to use like actors from soap operas, which again did not exactly match what I was looking for. So I kind of settled for Connie Nielsen, who was an action movie star, and who had that kind of physicality of action actors. So I think it was a movie that was kind of trying to explore the dark side of the way the modern societies have evolved. Yeah. And again, when I was making Demonlover, there was a certain level of moral judgment. I'm not saying it as a good thing. It was a movie that had some anger in terms of how the world was changing and how we were losing touch with human feelings and reality, and how money had taken over, media had taken over. Now I'm kind of looking at that same world. At least I'm trying not to judge it.
If you haven't seen Demonlover, it's a movie that talks about these sort of internal wars in the corporate world, with people trying to own some very devious porn industry. So there's nothing really positive about anything in that movie, and it's a very dark film. Very dark film.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask this note, I just watched Personal Shopper, where I feel like you're exploring new themes, but and maybe not. I don't know if it's moralistic in any way, but I think there's actually a really intriguing parallel you drew up between ghosts and text messaging in that film. Like you're speaking into the void somehow, trying to get contact. I wanted to ask you to speak a little bit about Personal Shopper in this context.
I've always thought that filmmaking, I mean the filmmaking I love, to put it that way, deals with the invisible. I think that cinema has a capacity of capturing something that's not visible. It captures things that are visible, but also things that are not visible. And because in a certain sense, the images of cinema are processed by an individual, meaning the viewer, and the viewer transforms what he is seeing into something that he appropriates. So I think there is always the presence of something that is impossible to capture in any movie image, it's something that is present in a way or another in all the movies I made. Perhaps even more so in a movie like Clouds of Sils Maria, but it's true that in Personal Shopper I wanted to make it the subject of the film. You know, I've always wanted to make not exactly a genre film, but a movie that has to do with the supernatural, that deals with the supernatural. Also because a lot of the movies that deal with the supernatural are American genre movies that are defined by a completely Manichaean worldview, which is the religious framework of American society. You know, there is this notion that what is visible is good, and what is lurking behind the visible is pure evil. You know, is the embodiment of evil. I do not believe in such things. I certainly don't believe in pure evil, and I'm the least Manichaean person. I think the opposite. I think there may be something transcendent in the invisible. I think there is something good hiding behind it, but of course it scares us, it terrifies us, because it touches very sensitive areas in our identity and our worldview. So I wanted to make a movie dealing with the supernatural I suppose, in a more European way. And liberated from the cliches, from the simplifications of genre filmmaking, because I think that it's. I've been deeply influenced by great genre filmmaking. You know, when I started making movies, the filmmakers I really worshipped were John Carpenter, David Cronenberg, Wes Craven. I mean, you know, they were very important to me when I started making movies, because I felt that they were making movies that dealt with the supernatural in ways that were extremely realistic, that were connected to the world, and they were touching areas that more serious filmmaking did not touch. Including a way of connecting physically with the audience. What I love about genre filmmaking is that it connects physically with the audience. You know, you are excited, scared, it makes you jump off your seat. I mean, all of a sudden, you know, your body is at work when you're watching that kind of film, as opposed to psychological movies where it's a more of an intellectual process, or a sensitive process, to put it that way, which is not to diminish it, but it's just I'm just explaining why it's different. And so I thought that there was a way of making a movie that deals with genre elements, but which ultimately would also be about some kind of inner search, and a way of exploring a character, a modern character, in more complex ways than psychology allows us. And it's really something. To me, it's some of my movies are more experimental than others. I suppose that Personal Shopper is about experimenting with this idea and just trying to figure out if it works or not.
There's something very interesting, because when I think to Olivier Assayas, I think to him like a painter, and then I try to explain better what I'm thinking. But you are very often dealing with the idea of language, with the idea of expression, with the capacity of the words to be something. And Clouds of Sis Marias, maybe it's the best example we can use. So why are you so interested in terms of communication somewhere?
Because that's what it's all about. I think language is everything. It's the way we speak, the way we stutter, the way we hesitate, the way I hesitate now when I'm speaking with you. I think it's a fascinating area of in terms if you want to understand how the human brain functions, how psychology functions. I mean, when I make a movie like Personal Shopper, it's more about silence than about dialogue. But ultimately, it's dealing with the same thing. When I'm making a film like Clouds of Sis Maria, you have different levels of language, and the movie is really defined by those different levels of language because. One part of it is the dialogue those two girls have between them, and I give them space to improvise there. They can change the word or whatever. And there are other scenes where they are rehearsing a play. So I actually wrote those scenes, so it's my play. But there's a certain precision in the language, which induces a different form of acting. So I like working on those nuances because I think they are fascinating. But the same way, I've been extremely interested in working in making movies with people using the English language as a second language, which is an area very few filmmakers have explored, but I think it's a fascinating dimension of the modern world because we know we live in a world where there is more and more global communication, which is defined by the use of English as a second language, and so it's like even I remember when I discussed Clouds of Sis Maria with Juliette Binoche, she said, are you not worried? I will, my English is good, but I have to do a lot of coaching to get it perfect for the film and so on and so forth. I said, Juliette, I just don't give a fuck. I mean, you're supposed you are a European actress. If you make mistakes in English, great. What's the problem? What's the issue? It will feel correct. So but I'm not even talking about movies like Irma Vep, where part of the fun, or part of the comedy in the film is the broken English. A lot of the French technicians use. It's or even a movie like Carlos is all about language. It's about people from different culture who speak different languages and how they manage to communicate one with the other. So some have better levels some have two languages, some have one language, some struggle with making themselves understood. If you're depicting the world, it's a very exciting and important dimension, and few movies use that area, because movies are so defined by local culture, their local culture. That's where they get funded. That's where they get financed. So yeah, they connect. And I'm not even talking about French cinema. French cinema financing is defined by the use of French language. So when I make movies using different language, just playing with languages, it's I'm giving myself a hard time because it's very difficult to get those movies financed.
But from what you are just saying about the English language and the fact that you managed to make films that are talking about global culture, that because of this common language has people from completely different worlds colliding with each other, and how, like, in the recent films you've been completely embraced the idea of the internet and like all these other eyes that are, for instance, on Juliette Binoche and all the people that there's no resistance from you as a filmmaker about the progress, about the ever-changing times, and the fact that the stories that people are living today are always new stories because of, for instance, technology having so much influence on our day-to-day life in different ways. And then in your last film, which you confirmed for me, is the first film that has a supernatural element. And it feels like you've given yourself yet another tool in your narrative language, because now that you can bring in things that are out this world, or like the fantastic, can now help you to flesh out other different surprising stories. Is that something you're gonna?
Yes,
continue?
I mean, you know, yes, I mean, it's true, but it's the way I function. You know, it's like you know, the use of the internet and text messaging are very important in personal shopper. And I've often asked, you know, I've been asked the question, oh, so you know, you make a movie. Why are you making this movie? Are you making a statement about the use of the internet text messaging? No, I'm making like zero statement. I'm just observing the fact that it has invaded my own life. You know, so, and if I'm telling the story of a modern character living in the modern world that we all share, it is someone who does have a smartphone and does some texting or explores the internet, and all of a sudden, you know, I'm not interested in technology as a fact. I'm using technology as it is transforming the human experience. That I think that if you depict a modern character, he is someone who is texting, who is using that form of communication, who's using the internet, who's checking, who's Googling this or that guy or this or that name, or who uses whatever app to find his way in a city where he has never set foot. I mean, that's what we are. And that's what makes us modern. I don't think you can depict any more characters who do not have those dimensions. You know, if willingly or unwillingly, we have been dragged into a digital age, and it has its issues, but it also has its very exciting new spaces for us to explore, discover, and it has made in many ways our life easier.
I have to tell you the truth. I was working because the person who is not here today asked me to have a question for Mr. Assayas. So I'm positive. Yes, I do. And the question was, do you consider yourself a nephew of the Nouvelle Vague or not? Because this is a typical question to a French director.
Yeah.
If you are linked or not to the old tradition.
It's I don't see it as an old tradition. I see it as a modern tradition. I think it's a question you could ask basically to any filmmaker today, because I genuinely think that moment in cinema, meaning modern cinema, has transformed the framework of cinema. You know, I think that whatever happened in France in the late 50s or early 60s is a moment where all of a sudden filmmakers, there was a revolution. They appropriated control of their films. You know, that all of a sudden it was okay to be functioning the same way in cinema, the same way a novelist functions in literature. And I think it changed the game for filmmakers all over the world. If we're discussing, you know, which filmmaker has influenced me most or whatever, you know, I possibly I will not use. Maybe I will. Maybe some of the Nouvelle Vague filmmakers would not be top of my list. My top of my list would be Luchino Visconti, I don't know, maybe, and Robert Bresson. But it's, but I whatever I've been making in film, in movies, would not have been possible if there had not been the French Nouvelle Vague and the new world it has mapped out for filmmakers all over the world. I think it's even if we are here and discussing films together, it's a major change that happened at that time, and it happened in every country all over the world.
Yes.
Sorry, this is somewhat of a practical question, maybe outside of the realm of what we're asking today, but I'm just wondering, you talked about yesterday at your Q&A about working on short films, and then now you're obviously doing mostly features. I'm wondering about the transition between those two and what it's like, having more space to talk about, deeper issues and going.
Sorry,
further.
I didn't get. I made two what?
I'm asking you about the transition from making short films to
Oh,
feature films.
Yeah.
So what that was like for you and what you
Oh,
learned on the way there.
Yeah. That's a while back, but it's. I've considered the short films I made as school films. I mean, I didn't go to film school. I did not want to go to film school. I mean, I think you go to film school if you feel you need film school. I didn't, for some reason.
At home.
Sorry.
You had it at home. This is the reason why.
Yes. Well, yeah, not so much because my father was a screenwriter, but he didn't consider filmmaking as an art. I mean, for him, painting was an art, literature was an art, filmmaking was something else. So no, I did not. And my mother didn't care about movies. I mean, she liked entertaining, whatever. But I think she had very little respect for filmmaking as an art. No, I was lucky because I could work as a trainee on a few features, so I kind of learned the basics, and I hated school anyway. So I finished university. I did a master in French literature, and the idea of going back to school after that was just beyond me nightmare. So I didn't go to film school, but my film school was writing about movies when I was writing for Cahiers du Cinéma for a few years, and making short films. I don't recommend you my short films. I mean, they're I think you make all. I mean, maybe when you the first year in the French film school, in FEMIS film school, they give you a camera and they tell you shoot whatever you want. And you come back, and the students come back, and they've done this and that, etc. And basically, the purpose is just to get rid of all the bad ideas first. Then you can start learning about. So I did that. I got rid of all the bad ideas. And also, because I come from this background of painting, graphic design, I was not at ease with writing. And I realized when I was making my short films that you have to learn to write if you want to make movies. I think it's extremely important. I mean, and I suppose that for me the transition was not so much from painting to filmmaking, but it was more like from painting to writing. After that, filmmaking was easy. And making my short films, I realized that it was about actors. And I didn't have a clue, I never worked, I never studied working with actors, dramaturgy or whatever. I had no experience. like on the first day of shooting my first short film. It was the first time in my life I was confronted with the notion of, you know, of someone acting in front of the camera, and I had no idea what to tell those guys. So as much as gradually my short films got better visually, the acting was still extremely poor, but at least it made me understand that the key to filmmaking was there, that the essentials of filmmaking was there, and of course I used that knowledge to make my first feature. I was 29 when I wrote my first feature. I was 30 when I shot it, which means that which is kind of late. But I suppose that I did not feel ready before that. You know, my first film is really like the first full screenplay I wrote for myself, having like 100% confidence that this was it. This was what I wanted to do. This was the movie I wanted to do, and it was up to the standards I had set for myself, or something like that. You know, but I think there is this organic process to making a first feature. You know, you have to prepare yourself, and finally when you're there, you can do it. But it's I think it's mostly it's something. It's not like a matter of adapting to the system. That it's about making sense of what you want to do yourself.
I wanted to ask about, you were talking about earlier that when you write, then like that's like he mentioned freezing, like you freeze the thing, and so I was wondering, like, how could you speak about the process that happens right there, like when you start thinking of it like visually and like using the camera and like sort of that aspect of it, because that's a process that it's different for everyone, and I want to know your process.
I suppose that the first step is casting the film. Once that is done, I start. You know, it's layer by layer. There's a couple of choices you make fairly early. I mean, meaning, are you going to use widescreen or 185? Are you going to use like the next film we'll be shooting in Super 16, but it could have been 35. I mean, you know, there's always some sort of early decision that kind of influences the dynamics of what the film will look like, of the style of the film. But it's I think that I need the actors, I need the sets, and I don't, like, for instance, like I don't design the shots before like the morning before shooting. I need to have all the elements. Once I have all the elements, I can start thinking about the shot. So I mean, for every movie, it's I discover the style of the film as I'm making it. I don't recommend it because, but that's the way I do it. I don't, because I just don't want to impose a theoretical. I don't want to put myself in a box.
Speaking of style, for instance, the movies you made in the 90s or the early 2000s have somewhat similar visual style, very fluid, kind of short lenses, just going,
long lenses.
Long lenses, being close to the characters and lots of of following people around, and I didn't notice any establishing shots or anything, or like you just always right at the heart of the action, just with the characters, and then with Personal Shopper, and this style it's clearly yours since you've been using different DOPs in different projects in the 90s, so it's not up to the DOP. And in Personal Shopper, there it's the format is different. There's establishing shots. It's more. There's lots of still frames, and how do you? Is this your decision completely, or does it have to do maybe?
Yeah. No, it's. I think I was using a lot of long lens handheld camera work, because it kind of energizes anything, So you have someone who's cooking an egg. I mean, you shoot it that way, it feels like a. But I think it was exciting when no one was doing it. When I felt I was kind of experimenting in that area. Now everybody's doing that, so it gets boring. I've been using wider lenses. I'm more interested. I mean, because I really like to be really very close to the actors. Now I kind of like the idea to have the whole body, to have a presence, to have something, to have the set, to have something, to have to inscribe the characters in their environment, and that's also one of the reasons I'm not watching. I never watch dailies. But one of the reasons I don't watch dailies is because when you look at your dailies separately from the film, you always have the impression that the shots you did with a long lens will look better. And so it kind of encourages you to use more and more long lenses, because it's kind of safer in a certain way. But ultimately, when you're editing the film, and once the film is edited, the wider shots work better. So I don't want to be influenced by this distortion. So I'm very careful with my viewing of my own material.
And continuing on the same kind of question, as you said, you can like it or not, but you entered the digital era. And so you are part of the process of changements from Super 16, 35, digital.
I never shot digital.
You never?
Never.
Why?
No, I did two documentaries, one on choreography and one filming a concert, because I like the idea of using those small cameras, but they are really very small scale, left-hand type project. I don't make my films in digital because 35mm is better. It's really as simple as that. There's no ideology there. There's no abstract idea. It just looks better. It looks better. It's easier to use. It gives you more latitude when you're doing the color timing. The texture is more. It's just better. If I saw something totally convincing in terms of digital image, I would instantly move there. I have nothing against technology. On the opposite, it's just that eventually it will get there. Who knows? But for me, it's still not good enough.
And use.
Hi, I was wondering about, because you wrote about film yourself as a critic for the Encourage to Cinema, I was wondering what you think of internet criticism, currently, like if you have any reflections about that.
The thing is, I think there are two different things. One thing is film criticism, and the other is film theory. I miss film theory. I think film theory is important, and I don't think on the internet or anywhere else where there is anything that's exciting, new, relevant in terms of theoretical reflection on the medium. If you have a name, I'd be happy to hear it. But but I've been looking and I've not found it. But there's a lot of film criticism of guys who give 5 stars, 4 stars, who pan this film, praise to high heavens this other, and so on and so forth, which ultimately I don't care much, because what I am interested is abstract ideas. I know it's a dirty word now, but I'm really interested. I'm actually interested in abstract ideas, and I'm interested in good writing. There is someone who I respected very much, who was the chief editor of Cahiers du Cinéma when I was writing there. He was Serge Danet. Like he died of AIDS a long time ago, and he's become a mythical figure of French film criticism. I loved Serge. I mean, I really, but I didn't share his taste. I was not, but I think that the reason why his work is still with us and it's still exciting and so on and so forth, it's because he's a great writer, and he's an artist in his own right. So I'm interested in art criticism in a sense that it has a value on its own. It's not just about stating the tastes of this or that guy. I mean, that's it. It's like food criticism. It's really like I've been to that restaurant, and I hated it. Good. Well, okay. So yeah, thank you. I won't go, or maybe I will go and have an opinion. It's not very exciting. So I think now we are in a strange place because we're saying, we're discussing internet criticism. I'm sure there are geniuses writing in the internet. Who knows? I mean, I don't read everything. I have no idea, what's going on. There's so much going on. There's too much going on to have any hold on. So the problem is that it's because it's so spread out that it ends up having like no relevance. And so maybe there's a genius, somewhere writing about movies somewhere on the internet, but in the end, the one who is important is the idiot who writes for the Daily. So it's that's the brutal truth of it.
This is the reason why I would like to ask you to repeat a story that possibly you told a lot of times. It's about your first strong work in terms of film criticism. It was the travel through the Asian cinema at the time of the Cahiers du Cinéma. Because at that time, you looked like a sort of explorer. No one was really interested, no one was really practical and expert about Asian cinema in the Western cinema. And suddenly you decided, or someone decided for you, to do that, and you spent a lot of time in order to prepare, to conceive, and to experiment your texts before writing them, which is total unconceivable somewhere at present days. So this is the reason why I would like you tell it.
Yes, it's I wrote about cinema for a fairly short span of time, but still it was like 5 years, from 1980, like January 1980 to the fall of 80 and the fall of 85. It was a very interesting moment in the way the medium was evolving and in terms of awareness of the map of cinema. I think, for me, there have been like 3 defining moments beyond the stuff I've written and the specific pieces that I like out of the stuff I've did. One moment was the fact that I could publish a series of pieces about special effects. Which was something no one was aware of, but was the texture of cinema was changing. It was the moment when all of a sudden the syntax of cinema, I mean, what was possible in terms of filmmaking expanded. you know, I remember I remember Serge Danet telling me, "Oh, Olivier, you are interested in science fiction and all that stuff, and you know, and why don't you write something about science fiction? Here in Cahiers du Cinéma, we've never really been able to deal with that kind of filmmaking before." And I was honored because it was I had been, you know, an editor for like 3 months, and you know, he was kind of offering me to do a bigger piece than usual. And I thought about it, and I came back to him and said, "You know, Serge, it's not about science fiction, it's about special effects. It's the fact that all of a sudden, you know, those guys are experimenting, they're trying new techniques, and stuff that was unthinkable yesterday has become doable. And until finally, we got to a situation where between a mixture of different techniques, we can represent anything in cinema. Now it seems obvious, but at the time, not at all. You know, it was technically impossible to do a lot of the stuff that you see in movies today. So yes, something about the texture of filmmaking was changing during those years, and I tried to capture that. I mean, to make sense of that. So that was one moment. Like a couple of years later, I went to we did a special issue of the magazine in Hollywood. It was my first time in the U.S., so it was a very important moment for me. And you know, and I was still a kid, and I had the possibility of meeting filmmakers. I would, you know, I was speaking with filmmakers I admire, and I would never have access to if I had been in film school or whatever. So you know, I specifically remember meeting Sam Peckinpah. Made a huge impression on me. And but I made this kind of exploration of the situation of American cinema at the time, and because I was the one out of the editors, I was the one who spoke like fairly decent English, so I was more I was in charge. I was more in charge than the other guys, and
to speak English for a French guy, it's always a tricky thing.
True. That was extremely exciting and eye-opening for me. And yes, a little later, in 1984, when Asian filmmaking was being discovered in the West, thanks to the work of Marco Müller, who did the first retrospective of Chinese cinema in Torino in 1981, if I'm not mistaken, to a couple of guys, Tony Raines in England, Pierre Rissian in France. There had been some kind of rampant awareness of Asian filmmaking, and Serge Danet, who also had traveled to Hong Kong in 1983, meaning a year before I went there with my friend Charles Tesson. I mean, they had opened a few perspectives, a few doors, but still there was no knowledge of the full map of what Chinese cinema was about. I mean, you have to put yourself in the perspective of a world where the idea, no one knew there had been an actual film industry in Shanghai, that those guys had been, you know, just making movies for years that were kind of competing with American films, I mean, at least made on the same standards, who had no idea there was a film industry in Korea, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, that you had no access to those movies, yeah, and zero awareness. I mean, they were just like absurdities. So the idea when I went to Hong Kong with Charles Tesson again was to do a special issue of Cahiers du Cinéma based on the model of the special issues we had done in Hollywood, that would somehow make sense of the history of what was actually going on in Hong Kong. Hong Kong was the most exciting place because it had it's where the Shanghai film industry retreated in 1941 after the fall of Shanghai. So all the guys who created the industry in Hong Kong and to a certain extent in Singapore were filmmakers from Shanghai. But since the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949, meaning since the 1950s, there has been a film industry in Hong Kong, generating genre movies, a star system, a completely bizarre local aesthetic based on the mythology of the kung fu, of the Guangdong kung fu stories. And within that world coexisted great filmmaking, stupid filmmaking, genius filmmaking, but no one knew the names of the directors, no one knew the names of the actors, no one knew how to put someone like Bruce Lee on the map, because Bruce Lee had surfaced a few years earlier, but no one knew where those movies came from. So the issue was to generate some sort of map of the past and present of Hong Kong filmmaking, including the Hong Kong new wave that was happening then with young filmmakers like Tsui Hark or An Hoi or whatever. So to me it was fascinating because
wait a minute, this is the young film critic who speaks. Who paid for this trip? You, Cahiers du Cinéma. That's a fantastic news. Maybe you can have an internet review who will pay you to
No, it's okay. Who paid for it? It's a good question. I think we got the plane tickets for free by sponsorship. There was some Cahiers sponsor who paid like 2 economy tickets for Charles and myself. The hotel room was paid by the Hong Kong Film Festival, because we went there during the Hong Kong Film Festival. There must be some Alliance Française, just support, maybe to pay for a few additional days because we stayed beyond the film festival. And we were not operating on a very big budget. We didn't have big per diems or whatever. But it was not exactly like that.
Sorry for some personal question.
Yeah. No, again, just because I could go on and on, because it obviously has been a very important moment for me. But again, I mean, so we made this special issue, which it still now is like a reference in terms of the history of mapping out the history of Hong Kong filmmaking. But the big deal for me was when I met Chen Kuo-fu, who was the Taiwanese film critic, and who, basically, the question he asked me, he was a young man, I mean, like myself at the time, and he was like the chief critic for the China Times, which is like the main daily in Taiwan. What are you doing in Hong Kong? What are you doing in Hong Kong interviewing those old filmmakers who are making those stupid kung fu movies? I mean, they all look the same, they're boring as hell, they are reactionary, whatever, Why don't you watch the movies from the young Taiwanese filmmakers? Because they are much more exciting and they are much more in touch with whatever Cahiers du Cinéma has embodied in terms of the history of modern filmmaking. And I said, well, I had no idea you had young filmmakers in Taiwan. He said, well, are you willing to come to Taipei and meet those guys? And I said, well, I trust you if you say so. Why not? So I managed to get myself a visa to go to Taipei, which was not that obvious. I mean, you had to. It was slightly more complicated than it is today, because at the time there still was the how do you say? Technically, the Taipei was still in a state of war against.
It was a forbidden country.
Yeah,
not recognized by a lot of. Even Western countries.
Yes. When you were Taiwanese, you could not. Your passport did not really allow you to travel to many countries. It was, so it was dictatorship and so on and so forth. but it was the end of it. So I traveled. I stayed at Cheng Po-Fu's place, and I watched the movies. And the movies were Edward Yang's first film, Ho Xiaoshen's first film. The cameraman of Edward Yang was a young Australian cameraman, Chris Doyle, who went on to become the renovator, the reinventor of Hong Kong filmmaking with Wong Kar-wai a few years later. Sylvia Chang was there, who was the girlfriend and producer of Edward Yang at that time, who became a force in Chinese cinema on her own. And they were slightly older than me, but not that much. So I was really about to start making my own films. So all of a sudden, the energy they had, the fact that they were a group, that they functioned together, that they had also common goals of exposing the dictatorship and use cinema to possibly open possibilities for democracy in Taiwan was a huge influence on me, and in a certain way. The energy I had a hard time finding in my environment in France at the time, I certainly found it with those Taiwanese filmmakers who all became friends and stayed my friends.
Can I talk for a second about Les Cahiers du Cinéma, which maybe some people might not be familiar with? It's a journal that was founded by the founders of the Nouvelle Vague, which you must know about, and that were focused mostly on the freedom of cinema and on film theory and an intellectual approach to filmmaking. Over the year, I would say it gained an unjust reputation as overly intellectual, as belonging to an older generation. And in fact, it was mostly just fighting against a certain uniformization or commercialization of cinema. And it just kept this status as a gatekeeper, for better or for worse, of kind of giving good reviews for people that were trying, and giving maybe sometimes not just bad reviews to bigger films. Olivier Assayas, coming from that background and having stuck to his guns of trying to make surprising cinema, trying to make something that could not be categorized, and still to this day, like 30 years into his career, surprising audiences. Is this just completely because if it's you, or do you feel a certain responsibility of just fighting against a certain, is there a force that is kind of feel if you sometimes pushed to be something that's more uniform, that's more commercial?
Do you mind if I retell the story of Cahiers in my own words?
I wasn't there.
Joking. No, but it's because you know, Cahiers du Cinéma was the magazine that was created by André Bazin, who was the theoretician of the Nouvelle Vague, and obviously all the great French filmmakers started their careers basically writing for that magazine. So it was the one French film magazine where you did not write because you wanted to become a critic or a journalist, but you wrote there because you wanted to become a filmmaker. You know, so and it's the only reason why I wrote there. You know, I had no ambition to become a film critic. It didn't even cross my mind. It's really I thought that writing in Cahiers du Cinéma, because of the history of the magazine, just helped me, you know, just to get one step closer to what I wanted to do, meaning filmmaking. Now it's very different because that tradition is gone. I mean, it doesn't work that way now. Now people go through film school or whatever they do, or they do music videos, or they do a million things, and writing film theory is not part of what they do. I mean, at least very few. And the exciting thing, or problem with Acquainted Cinema is that it's a magazine that has always looked like its times. So during the very political 1970s, it became mostly a political magazine writing about French politics and reprinting stuff from Chinese art reviews from the Cultural Revolution and so on and so forth. I mean, meaning that when I grew up, I was not reading it because I was not interested in that stuff. And when I started writing for it, it's when gradually it recreated some sort of connection to filmmaking. All of a sudden they opened the doors to younger filmmakers, including myself. And it was all about reestablishing, that's why we went to Hollywood. It was a way of reestablishing some kind of connection with American filmmaking, which had not really been discussed in the newspaper for years at that time. But I've benefited a lot from the fact that I was writing at that specific moment of the magazine. Now it has changed a lot. So again, as I'm saying, it has changed it has constantly changed with the times. And at this point, it has become a completely different magazine from the magazine I've been writing for, because it's younger filmmakers who have different issues, different values, and are interested in different stuff I'm not so interested, honestly, with. It's at least it has some connection to modernity. I don't see myself. I understand your question, and ultimately, yes, I do think that it's very important to be because I've been able to make movies with freedom, and I think I have a sort of responsibility to protect that freedom, to kind of stick to my values, which are the values of authorship and some sort of ethics and morality in the way of approaching cinema that I learned during my years at that magazine. And in that sense, again, Cahiers du Cinéma has been my film school, and ultimately, in a certain way, I felt it was my duty that rain or shine, I stick to the values I learned through my few years there.
Stanley Kubrick was an incredible director, but extremely concerned about the budget of his films. He had a real anxious attention to the final result of every single project, saying to himself, I need to work with big companies, but I need to ensure that any of my films will be somewhere a success. Which is a very strange approach. Not very European somewhere. What is your attitude about economical part of your work? Because any one of us has in his pockets the money to do a film. So somewhere I think that a director can be even oppressed by the idea of how many money is spent.
I'm very concerned with the budget of my films. I mean, I'm very concerned with the fact that the money is spent to the best possible way in terms of getting a movie on the screen. I really come from a culture of making movies that look much more expensive than they actually are. But it's also a matter of finding the right balance and and just making the right choices, and you're constantly day after day confronted with those where is it you are actually protecting the production values in your film, or when are you putting yourself at risk? Because again, it's if you stay within your budget, if you stay within, whatever happens with the film, if it's very successful, I mean, I feel more comfortable with making movies where there's not a lot of risk involved in terms of the financing, because if there's too much at stake, you give yourself a certain degree of pressure with the idea that, okay, so this film has to click with the audience and how it's going to end. But I don't think that, I mean, if you're making mainstream movies, if you're making, like Denis Villeneuve and you're making Blade Runner, yes, I mean, you're concerned to make a movie that is on that kind of scale, connects with a major audience. It's part of your responsibility, that's part of your job. When you make a movie that is about protecting, I mean, which is concerned about trying things, experimenting, just finding new solutions for filmmaking. You feel sometimes a bit like the research and development department of filmmaking, again, the safer your film is in terms of its financing, the better you are, the more freedom you have, the more control you have. When a lot of money is at stake, you have to you can't have full control. You have to justify yourself. You have to do a lot of explaining, which doesn't mean that I don't think of the audience. I do think of the audience. I always hope my movie will be extremely successful. I'm doing my best for that. I try to make movies that are entertaining. I think it's very much a part of what filmmaking is about. But I think they are entertaining in their own way, in the sense that they surprise the audience, they play games with the audience, and they try to be constantly exciting. But again, on their own terms.
Tell me the truth. If Ridley Scott offers to you to shoot the prequel of Blade Runner, would you accept or not?
I would do it. But I don't think he will do that. But who knows? Who knows?
Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah. No. He likes my vibe. I mean, he likes my films. I mean, he sent me a screenplay once. That was less interesting than the prequel to Blade Runner. But it's no. I mean, it's if the thing is, it's a matter of balance. I honestly, I don't think this kind of situation will happen. But in case it happened, I would say, okay, so I'm giving away a big part of my freedom, but at least I have a lot of fun doing stuff I've never done before, and I'm kind of, I will be like a kid playing with toys, and, part of the fun, I will enjoy myself. I will have fun doing it, so, okay. But if I'm giving away my freedom to make some kind of middle-brow melodrama in Hollywood, again, what's in it for me?
Yep.
Any last questions?
We're finishing, so it's your time to ask questions.
I was wondering about, so I recently saw Summer Hours, and I felt like it engaged me in a very interesting way, because the like conflict of that film is sort of always felt, but never really like fully engaged. The siblings dividing up the house, and I was wondering if that to speak to that, to the like not engaging into the conflict fully, but bringing it out somehow in a different way, and how you think about that.
Yeah, it's sibling rivalry is a staple of Broadway, and and since the Cherry Orchard in theater in general, and always the commonplace approach is, the commonplace approach is families have secrets, like big secrets, and someone comes up and exposes the hypocrisy and the horror of whatever has been going on in silence before. It's so much cliche and you know those guys screaming at each other. I think that if you're dealing with, I think it happens in softer and ultimately more profound and more disturbing ways. I think the conflict, I'm not interested, I mean, in a movie like A Summer Hours, I'm not so much interested in the conflict as with the results, as like the tangible results. The house will be sold, you know. So they did not really, they didn't, there's no discussion because there's no space for discussion. Everybody has, we're all civilized, and you know, and there's no point in fighting when there's no battle to be won, really. So there is something about time passing that's bigger and stronger than us, and but then the question is, well, what will remain as imprints, as footprints, and possibly art is the answer. I mean, art may be like the footprints of the past, of how lives were lived in the past, of what remains of those lives. So I think that I was more interested in exactly how time passes, how life and art are connected, how art is only meaningful if it's it's the genuine testimony of something that has to do with the experience of life, of the universality of the experience of life, more than, you know, the conflict between middle-aged siblings.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.